Hello, my name is Simon Double and welcome to Inside the Rails, a monthly podcast for horse racing enthusiasts everywhere. And as ever, I'm joined by my co-host Phil Boyle from BG Racing. Hi Phil, how are you?
Hi Simon, yeah, I'm all good, thanks. Exciting time of the year, isn't it? We've got the Spring Jumps festivals coming round the corner any time and some brilliant racing in the last month.
Certainly agree with that, and we'll come on to some of those races shortly. Just as important though, we have another great guest lined up this month, David Armstrong, CEO of the RCA, the Racecourse Association. He'll be joining us. And I think you met him, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I met him last year at Windsor at one of the evening meetings, part of the racing league that was on last year. I know that, like us, he sees shared ownership is very important to the future success of racing. I spoke to him about syndicates for quite some time on the evening, and I'm sure he'll be a great guest today.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm sure he will be. But let's start by finding out what's been going on in the world of Phil Boyle and BG Racing since our last podcast.
Well, listeners might remember that shortly after we recorded the last episode, I was due to go to Lingfield with some of my shareholders. We were helping our trainer Michael Atwater with the cost of his hurdler, Joey's Gift, in exchange for the owner's badges when he ran. Sadly, there wasn't any prize money that day, and we ended up a bit disappointing because he downed tools early in the race, dropped himself out of contention. It was really a case of one step forward and two steps back. He stepped forward on his second run, and this one was his third, and it was pretty poor. And he's at the level where he'd need to be going forwards if he was ever going to win races. So, regrettably, we decided to call it a day with him after the race. Fortunately, Michael's lined up a nice home for him outside of racing, so that's the plan for his future. And it's always disappointing when these things don't work out, but you'll know the disappointments make the good times all the sweeter, don't they? If everything went brilliantly every time, it wouldn't be nearly so much fun.
Yes, I mean, I always think it's a bit like betting, and if you're winning all the time, the thrill of winning would soon wear off, wouldn't it? So, but nice to know that the horse is having a nice home. That's great. So, how does that leave you then with no race planning to do? I cannot believe for 1 minute that Phil Boyle is going to be sitting by idly twiddling his thumbs. What are you going to be up to?
No, I sure I will be at the races. More importantly, both my other horses are back in training, so both should be back on the racecourse in the spring. So hopefully I haven't got too long to go without owning one at the races. But yeah, I've arranged a couple of shareholder visits. I was down at Neil Mulholland's yard earlier this week, Michael Atwater's yard last week. And as you know, a morning on the gallops and at the stables with a chance to sort of meet some of the shareholders, have a bit of a chat, have a bit of a catch up. It's something people really enjoy, probably as much, if not more, than going to the races with a runner.
Well, absolutely. And that's what you and I always emphasise, isn't it? The behind-the-scenes, inner sanctum, if you like, experience. Well, my owners had one of those a few weeks ago when we had a trip to Amy Murphy's yard. We had a fabulous morning, 17 of us, owners and would-be owners in the Buratino 2-year-old. Amy gave us a lot of her time. We saw the horse do a canter on the all-weather and then a canter upsides, going upsides another horse, in other words, on the grass, which was lovely and unexpected. Then it was off to the Bedford Lodge Hotel for lunch, and I think I can safely say a good time was had by all. More shares sold, and dear listeners, there are one or two still available. There you go.
That's good to hear. And yeah, these social events, I've seen a lot of them on Twitter in the last week. They're excellent things. A lot of the syndicates run them, and yeah, sounds like you've had a good morning there. But speaking of your horses, obviously the Buratino colt's going to be out or gelding's going to be out at the start of the year. What about your other runners? Have you had any, or have you got any coming up?
Well, the Buratino, Amy's quite hopeful of him being out about May, June time, so sort of first half of the season. Twilight Bay is the one that's ticking over for Slurry Racing, or should be, but for Storm, Dudley and Eunice the other day. It was due to go to Lingfield. Clearly that was never going to happen. It's due to run in a couple of days, so by the time this podcast goes out, she'll have run. We've booked Kieran Fallon. I'm hoping for a good run, as they say, hoping for a good run. Now, Phil, you've been in fine form recently on the tipping front, so don't be modest about this. And I know our listeners will be very keen to know what you fancy in the future, given your success in recent weeks.
Yeah, I have been on a nice run. I've been using the Inside the Rails Twitter account to put a few of my fancies out, and I tipped Glory and Fortune in the Betfair Hurdle at Newbury a couple of weeks ago. He won at a nice price, and then the same day Top Dog, which some people might remember I mentioned as one to follow from Cheltenham back in November. He hung across the track at Cheltenham that day, and I thought he would have won without doing that. Well, he won the listed bumper at Newbury a couple of weeks ago, also at a decent price. He hung across the track there as well, so he's obviously got a little bit of quirkiness to him, but he's got a lot of talent as well, because he managed to win despite that. And I had that on the Twitter account as well. So I was quite hopeful on that Saturday evening that I was going to get a call from the Racing Post to ask me if I wanted a job as a tipster, but sadly nothing came through.
Well, impressive tipping indeed, Mr. B. But I've known you a while, and you and I both know these winning runs rather can come to a rapid end. So maybe stick to the day job. What do you think?
Yeah, you're probably right. I don't think tipping is in my future really.
Well done anyway. Excellent.
Thanks.
Now look, this is being recorded a few weeks before Cheltenham. Many horses have multiple entries in the various races, and a lot can change in a few weeks. They say a week's a long time in politics. I think it's even longer in horse racing. Trainers might decide, for example, to reroute their charges to other big races at either Aintree or perhaps Punchestown. Having said that, of course, we are both looking forward to Cheltenham. Are you going?
I am, yes. After a year with no spectators, I was hoping that Luke Harvey might let me carry his bags last year at Cheltenham, but nothing came of our interview of him. So I was forced to watch on TV. But this year I'll be back at the racecourse. It does mean that I held daily Zoom calls for my shareholders each morning last year for us to chat about the racing, and I won't be able to do that this year. I'm going to do an evening call the week before this time around. I thought about doing them on the morning of the racing, but I wasn't sure how Gloucestershire's police would feel about me hosting a Zoom call from my car whilst driving to the track. So, I decided against that. And I know you hosted preview events last year. Are you doing anything similar this year?
No, not this year. I'm concentrating on live hospitality, which I'm really looking forward to. Got an owner's day out with some full-blown champagne hospitality coming up soon at Huntingdon. So really looking forward to that. I'll
look out for my invitation.
In the post. But let's have a preview of Cheltenham based on recent races. Shall we look at the novices first? And by the way, for those not so familiar with all the different types of races, racing, like all sports and industries, has its own jargon. So novices are for young horses as opposed to handicappers who tend to be more experienced. Also, the novice races, whether they're hurdle races or chases, which are over the bigger obstacles, they're run at level weights, as opposed to handicaps, where the better horses are giving weight away to lesser horses. So, that's a little bit of jargon busting out of the way. In terms of novice horses, I'm really looking forward to seeing Constitution Hill in the Supreme, the traditional curtain raiser for the meeting. What about you, Phil?
The first thing to say is you're absolutely right. It's very hard to know where everyone will end up. In fact, a couple of hours before we recorded the podcast, there was a couple of changes. So, things will change in the run up to the meeting, but hopefully our listeners will bear with us if we put any of the horses in a race that they don't end up in. We do have some brilliant novice hurdlers and chasers this year, starting with the juveniles, and those are the 4-year-olds for our listeners' benefit if you don't know that. So they're a category in themselves, the very young horses. I was totally blown away by the run of Pied Piper at the Cheltenham Trials meeting. There was some talk of him going to the Supreme Novices Hurdle, which is open to all horses, but it seems he might stick with the 4-year-olds in the Triumph Hurdle as his target. I must admit, I was on my phone backing him for the Triumph Hurdle before he even got to the winner's enclosure at Cheltenham. I'm not kidding to say if you just swapped in a video of him cantering to the start with the one where he was coming up the hill to win the race, you probably wouldn't have been able to tell the difference. The jockey barely moved. It was like he was out for a morning canter and everything was 20 lengths behind him. The Irish could have a stranglehold on the Triumph Hurdle though, because Vauban, who was close behind Pied Piper on his debut, won at the Dublin Racing Festival, and looks like the two of them will be reopposing in the race. And I must admit, I'd be surprised if the home challenge is at the same level. The only British juvenile that really caught my eye was a horse called Impulsive One, who won at Musselburgh. And whilst he looks very smart, he doesn't seem to be in the Cheltenham races, so he could be one for Aintree or even Punchestown, because Nicky Henderson, his trainer, likes to take a couple over there.
Totally agree about Pied Piper. Incredibly impressive. Mind you, he is rated 96 on the flat, was trained by the Gosdens, and cost 225,000 guineas at the sales last autumn. I've got a question for you, Phil.
Mm-hmm.
And listeners, Phil doesn't know this question's coming his way. Do you know who bred him and indeed who used to own him?
No.
Well, she's a lady who's not been very well recently. Not too ill, but not been too well recently. Been in the news.
That'll be the Queen then, I suspect.
Well done. Well done. Need a little help, but you got there in the end. Yeah, the Queen. So she'll be delighted if that goes on to win at Cheltenham, because I'm sure she'll get some breeder's prize. So
yeah, sure, yeah.
Now, other novice hurdlers to look out for, Phil. What do you fancy?
Well, we don't know where Willie Mullins will send his big two. Dysart Dynamo and Sir Gerhard are prominent in the betting for both the Supreme Novices Hurdle and the Ballymore Novices Hurdle. One's over 2 miles, one's over 2.5. So horses obviously have got either option. Nicky Henderson's two that we've talked about on the pod before, Constitution Hill and John Bon, they both like they'll go to the Supreme. If the two Henderson horses and the two Mullins horses ended up in the Supreme, it could be the race of the festival, and it's the first one, so it might all be downhill after race number 1 on the Tuesday. I think I like Constitution Hill the best, but to be honest, I'm really just looking forward to seeing where they all run, hoping they all run against each other, and then we can see who comes out on top.
What about the novice chasers, though? I was keen on Ahoy Senor at one point, a horse we've mentioned in the past, but I think he may end up being a better hurdler than a chaser, but maybe I'm doing a disservice. Certainly, Galopin des Champs looks a worthy favourite for the novices' chase, although I think this might be one of those situations where the horse may be rerouted to another race. Is that right, Phil?
Yeah, they've announced today that Willie Mullins has suggested that he might go to the Turner's Novices Chase, which is the 2.5 mile race, rather than the Brown Advisory Festival Novices Chase, which is over 3 miles. So he was a hot favourite for the longer race, and it now looks like he might take on Bob Ollinger in the shorter race, which is probably better for us because that shorter race now looks like it could be a bit special.
Okay.
There's also a British raider in there, Lom Press, who was brilliant at Sandown.
One of Venetia Williams, isn't it, I think?
Yeah, absolutely. And he looked really good. I mean, he'd obviously have a tough task if both Bob Ollinger and Galopin des Champs turned up, but I would still hope he would give them plenty to do. And then in that longer race, you've mentioned Ahoy Senor. He actually looked quite good at Wetherby last time, bounced back and won, but he'd been beaten by Brave Man's Game before that. And that horse came out and gave a load of weight away in a Newbury handicap. I'd love to see more of these top horses going for handicaps because it just adds a different dimension to the race, them carrying a lot of weight against a lower rated rival who hasn't got the same level of form. But yeah, Brave Man's Game looks to be getting better with every run. I still remember running him down on the podcast earlier in the year, and I'm a convert to him now. I think he could be the banker of the week for Britain if Bob Ollinger and Galopin des Champs both run in the Turners. And then the other race is the Arkle, where Edward Stone has looked very good for the British side. But I must admit, I've got a soft spot for Riviere de Tel from Ireland. She was unlucky at the Dublin Racing Festival, which is their big Cheltenham Trials meeting. She's been second in Grade 1s in her last 2 starts. I think she could turn around that Dublin Racing Festival form with Blue Lord, who's slightly shorter in the market for the Arkle than she is. And yeah, she'd be my bet for this, a nice each way bet.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Enough of the novices. Let's look at the championship races for more experienced horses. Will we see, do you think, an Irish whitewash again? Now, in the champion hurdle, I think you and I both fancy, we've had a few quid on, I think, Antipost on Adagio. And I don't know if you know, Phil, but he's shortened from 40 to 1 to about 16 to 1 in places, which is encouraging. So that's good news on the champion hurdle front. Looking at the Stayers hurdle, last year's winner, Floring Porter, that should be there or thereabouts again. I had a few quid last year and I've done the same this year. Often horses in that race, they come back time and time again. We all remember Big Bucks, multiple winner. So I suppose that brings in Paisley Park, who came back to form last time. So what are your thoughts, Phil?
Yeah, I think the Irish might have the advantage again. I can't see Honeysuckle getting beaten in the champion as much as I'd love to see Adagio run well. I'm like you. I've got a soft spot for him. He ran really well against Goshen after a break last weekend, and maybe the place part of my anti-post each way bet is still alive, but I'll be a bit surprised if he beat Honeysuckle. And the same goes for my other anti-post bet in the champion hurdle, Zanair, who I backed after the Triumph hurdle last year. I wrote that off a couple of months ago because he keeps getting beaten by Honeysuckle, but he could get beaten again and still be placed, I guess. So that's a possibility. And there's a horse called T Hapu who has won in Ireland a couple of times. He's another contender. He's a reasonably short price, but I can't see any of them getting to Honeysuckle, and let's just hope that Daggio can get in there in the mix and